What if the world's most formidable military force could be neutralized, not by tanks or bombs, but by the very technology meant to make it invincible? Picture this: an army that has never lost a battle, its soldiers trained to perfection, its weapons the envy of the globe. Yet, all of it rendered helpless by a silent, invisible enemy: lines of code, radio static, and digital sabotage. This is not science fiction, but a chilling possibility that grows more real with every advance in technology. In the 21st century, modern armies are bound together not just by discipline or tradition, but by an intricate web of satellites, encrypted radios, drones, sensors, and real-time data. This web, known in military jargon as C4ISR, command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, functions as the nervous system of any advanced fighting force. It transforms scattered units into a single, coordinated organism, capable of responding to threats with breathtaking speed and precision. Think of C4ISR as the central nervous system of a living being. Without it, an army is reduced to a collection of isolated cells, unable to sense, think, or act as one. In recent decades, nations have poured uncountable billions into building these digital nervous systems, believing them to be unbreakable. Yet, history teaches us that the greatest strengths often hide the most catastrophic weaknesses. To understand how this vulnerability came to be, let's travel back to the early days of digital warfare. In the late 1990s, during the Kosovo conflict, NATO forces demonstrated the power of real-time information dominance. Allied aircraft, guided by satellite imagery and digital communications, struck with pinpoint accuracy, crippling the enemy's ability to respond. This was hailed as the dawn of a new era, a future where wars would be won not just by firepower, but by bytes and bandwidth. But with every technological leap, new risks emerged. The more an army relied on interconnected systems, the more it exposed itself to a different kind of attack, one that could bypass soldiers and tanks altogether, targeting the digital lifelines that held them together. Fast forward to today, and the digital web that binds modern militaries is more complex and more vulnerable than ever. The reliance on foreign proprietary technology has become a critical Achilles heel. Imagine a country whose entire military command structure is built on commercial satellites from SpaceX and Viasat, data centers running Microsoft and Oracle servers, and radios using Harris Corporation's secret protocols. On the surface, this seems like a recipe for technological supremacy. But beneath that surface, the truth is far more unsettling. These systems are black boxes, closed, opaque, and controlled by outsiders. The military using them has no access to the source code, no way to inspect the encryption, no ability to verify the hardware. In essence, it is renting its vital nervous system, placing its sovereignty in the hands of foreign vendors. The risk is not theoretical. In 2010, the Stuxnet worm famously crippled Iran's nuclear facilities by exploiting vulnerabilities in Siemens controllers. More recently, the SolarWinds hack of 2021 showed how deeply adversaries can penetrate even the most secure networks by targeting supply chains. The situation is even more dire for militaries. If your command system runs on foreign code, proprietary radio protocols, and leased satellites, you are never truly in control. The very infrastructure designed to keep you safe and effective can become a weapon turned against you, at the flick of an invisible switch. Let's delve into a hypothetical, but all too plausible scenario that could unfold in the near future, a scenario military planners now study under the codename Electronic Storm. Step by step, we will unravel how a single, well-orchestrated cyber campaign could dismantle an entire military's command structure. It begins not with a barrage of missiles, but with a whisper, a quiet infiltration that goes unnoticed until it is far too late. Imagine the digital spine of a modern army. Satellites orbiting silently above, drones mapping enemy movements, databases tracking every soldier and piece of equipment, encrypted radios transmitting orders across continents. All these systems, fused together, form a living, breathing entity, C4ISR. Like a spider's web, it stretches across the globe, binding together every person, vehicle, and weapon in an intricate tapestry of information. To the outside observer, the system seems invincible. It is built on the latest Western technology, boasting speed, security, and redundancy. Communications travel through SpaceX and Viasat satellites. Data is processed in Microsoft and Oracle-powered servers, and encrypted Harris radios connect units from headquarters down to the smallest patrol. Each layer is designed for resilience, every node a promise of safety. Yet beneath this gleaming armor lies a critical flaw. Each component is a black box, its secrets sealed off by proprietary code and hardware. The military operating this system has no way to audit the software, inspect the encryption, or verify the absence of hidden backdoors. Their trust is absolute, their ability to verify non-existent. This is not just a technical oversight, it is a surrender of sovereignty. The entire command structure is a tenant on foreign-owned property, dependent on technologies and protocols controlled by distant powers. The illusion of technological supremacy masks a profound vulnerability. Russian analysts, well-versed in the dark arts of cyber warfare, saw this for what it was, a golden opportunity. They understood that in the digital age, the side that controls technology controls the fight. Dependency on opaque, foreign-made systems means the entire network can be sabotaged or disabled at a moment's notice, turning strength into paralysis. The question was not how to break through the system's defenses, but how to find, and quietly flip, the hidden off switch. The operation began with meticulous planning. Russian cyber and intelligence units mapped out the architecture of the enemy's digital fortress. They looked not just for technical vulnerabilities, but for human ones. In the annals of espionage, the greatest secrets often fall not to brute force, but to subtle persuasion and patient cultivation. The first target was not a firewall or a password, but a person. Russian operatives quietly profiled hundreds of officers and IT specialists, searching for cracks in the armor, financial troubles, political disaffection, personal grievances. From this vast pool, they identified a single data center officer. He was under financial strain, ideologically conflicted, and, crucially, in possession of the right credentials. Classic espionage followed. Over months, Russian agents cultivated the target, offering subtle incentives, exploiting doubts, and building trust. Eventually, the officer was persuaded to cooperate, granting Russian teams access not just to information, but to the very heart of the enemy's system. Through him, tailored malware was physically installed on the main servers of the Strategic Command Center, a move reminiscent of Cold War operations where insiders turned the tide of history. But people were only half the equation. In parallel, Russian cyber units targeted the military's supply chain, a tactic that has grown increasingly common in recent years. Using shell companies and false identities, they purchased shipments of advanced network switches, destined for an upcoming upgrade. At a secure facility, these switches were surgically altered. Deep within their firmware, undetectable backdoors were planted, lying dormant, awaiting an encrypted activation signal. Supply chain attacks are not new. In 2014, a Chinese cyber unit famously compromised the firmware of network equipment bound for Taiwanese government agencies, granting them persistent access for years. The lesson: every device, every component, is a potential Trojan horse. By the time the operation reached full maturity, Russia had established at least two independent footholds. One was embedded deep within the strategic command structure, the other at the tactical edge, hidden in frontline network hardware. Each served as a silent outpost, immune to routine scans and security audits, quietly relaying intelligence at will. With these parallel channels open, Russian cyber teams began the painstaking work of mapping the enemy's entire digital nervous system from the inside. Node by node, they charted 147 critical points: servers, routers, and communication hubs. They traced every backup route, every redundancy, every contingency protocol. This level of detail mirrored the meticulous preparations of Operation Orchard in 2007, when Israeli cyber units mapped Syrian air defense networks before a daring airstrike. No connection was overlooked. Every vulnerability, device type, and encrypted link was catalogued. For each weak point, a tailored disruption plan was designed, ranging from stealthy software sabotage to targeting specific devices for precision missile strikes. The groundwork was laid for a coordinated, devastating attack that could sever the system's lifelines in an instant. The adversary's supposed digital invulnerability was already fatally breached. Without a single shot fired, the entire command, control, and communications network stood exposed, vulnerable to attack from within and without. All that remained was to choose the moment when silence would erupt into chaos. Every silent outpost was in place. The only question was when and how the storm would break. In modern war, destruction begins long before the first missile launches. It starts in silence, with algorithms and radio waves that cripple entire armies before a single bullet flies. This is the new face of battle, a contest of code, signals, and information, where the first strike may be invisible. At a single synchronized moment, Russia's digital trap was sprung. Cyber implants, seeded weeks earlier deep within enemy networks, activated in unison. Firewalls crumbled under denial-of-service floods, while precision data attacks twisted sensor feeds and injected phantom orders. Officers watched in disbelief as their screens filled with lies, and the line between truth and deception vanished. Simultaneously, Russia unleashed its most advanced electronic warfare systems, Krasuka-4, Murmansk-BN, and Divnomori. These giants of the electromagnetic spectrum blanketed the airwaves with impenetrable static. Enemy radars went dark, satellites lost guidance, and every GPS and GLONASS signal dissolved into noise. Within seconds, the adversary was rendered deaf, blind, and lost in a world turned hostile by invisible hands. Within 5 minutes, the collapse was total. The enemy's entire C4ISR network went dark. From generals in their command bunkers to squads on the front lines, every unit was cut off, unable to receive or send orders. The digital nervous system that once held the force together was replaced by isolation and silence. Panic spread rapidly. Monitors flickered, then died. Radios spat static. Generals hammered keyboards, desperate for contact as their chain of command dissolved before their eyes. It was more than a blackout. It was the sudden death of situational awareness, trust, and control. Desperate commanders scrambled for backups, emergency channels, alternate frequencies, satellite phones. But Russian cyber teams had anticipated every move, mapping and disabling every redundant route long before the attack. Each attempt to improvise met a digital dead end. The enemy's every hope had been methodically erased. On the battlefield, confusion turned deadly. Tank commanders drove blind, their sensors dead. Artillery waited for targeting data that never arrived. Special forces, stranded behind enemy lines, found their encrypted comms useless. With no way to communicate or receive orders, entire brigades stalled, paralyzed by uncertainty and fear. Meanwhile, Russian forces advanced with cold precision. Their own networks, hardened and shielded, kept operating. Secure links allowed rapid adaptation and coordinated strikes. With the adversary paralyzed and blind, Russian units seized key terrain and assets in hours, not days. The fate of an entire army, billions of dollars in hardware, tens of thousands of lives, and national security, now hung not on firepower, but on control of the invisible battlefield. The lesson was stark. In digital war, even the mightiest force can fall if it loses its nervous system. What happened in those first few hours became a case study for military planners worldwide. But it also raised urgent questions for every nation still dependent on vulnerable, foreign-built technologies. The collapse echoed the lessons of past conflicts, like the Maginot Line in World War II, where reliance on static defenses proved disastrous against a nimble, innovative enemy. Victory in the 21st century does not belong to those with the largest armies or the loudest guns. It belongs to those who can see, disrupt, and control what others cannot even detect. The true battlefield is now invisible, dominated by lines of code, stray radio signals, and fleeting shadows of misinformation. The Russian electronic storm exposed a new doctrine of warfare. Rather than relying on brute force, it targeted the trust an army placed in its digital backbone. Once inside, Russian information operators unleashed chaos, not with explosives, but with psychological and cyber weapons. They injected fake orders, crafted false surrender instructions, and seeded panic through compromised enemy channels. A single forged message, or a counterfeit chain of command, could paralyze entire units, dissolving trust far faster than any artillery barrage. Psychological pressure became a force multiplier. Surrender leaflets rained from drones, echoing the techniques used in the Gulf War when coalition forces dropped millions of leaflets to encourage Iraqi troops to surrender. Haunting broadcasts echoed from captured radio towers, and anonymous messages targeted soldiers with despair. Disorder was not just a side effect, it was the primary weapon. Units broke not at the front lines, but in their minds, worn down by the relentless flow of misleading signals. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson is this: no amount of imported firepower or sophisticated hardware can guarantee sovereignty. When your command system runs on foreign code and leased satellites, you are never truly in control. Technological autonomy is now the foundation of a nation's independence. The digital infrastructure you do not own is a permanent vulnerability, one your adversaries will always seek to exploit. Modern war is not confined to borders or battlefields. The front and the rear, soldier and civilian, official and private, all blur together in cyberspace. A cyber attack on a data center thousands of kilometers away can have the same strategic effect as a missile striking a command post. Civilian communications, logistics, and morale are now targets. Anyone dependent on digital networks is a potential casualty. Success in this new era depends on integration. It is not enough to have cyber units or electronic warfare teams working in isolation. Victory demands seamless coordination, where cyber, electronic, and kinetic forces move as one, amplifying each other's strengths and masking each other's weaknesses. The army that can orchestrate these invisible domains will dictate the tempo and outcome of conflict. To ignore these lessons is to invite disaster, not just for militaries, but for any organization or nation that entrusts its fate to opaque or uncontrollable systems. Digital blindness, dependency, and complacency are the new Achilles' heels. So what happens when the very systems designed to protect you become your greatest vulnerability? To answer this, let's explore the chilling consequences of digital dependence in modern conflict. If your lifeline, whether personal, corporate, or national, is tied to a system you do not own, who truly holds the switch? This is not just a cryptic puzzle for generals or spies. It is the defining question of our digital age. Look at the world's leading economies and militaries. Many depend on foreign-built microchips, software, and cloud platforms. The United States, for example, relies heavily on Asian semiconductor manufacturing. Europe's critical infrastructure often runs on American cloud services. Even small businesses entrust their operations to code and hardware they cannot inspect or control. The lesson is clear. When someone else designs your network, runs your data, or commands your core infrastructure, your autonomy is alone, revocable at any moment. The Russian electronic storm was not a victory of tanks or missiles, but a masterclass in exploiting the hidden weaknesses beneath technological shine. A Western-designed nerve center, once celebrated as a marvel, became a liability, a fortress built on foreign soil. Consider a real-world parallel. In 2007, China allegedly inserted malicious chips into hardware bound for American companies, opening a backdoor for surveillance and sabotage. In 2015, the Office of Personnel Management in the United States suffered a massive breach through compromised software, exposing millions of sensitive records. Each incident highlights a simple truth. Whoever controls the technology controls the future. Every layer of the compromised military system, from satellites to servers, depended on technology made and maintained abroad. The software was a sealed vault, the radio protocols a private dialect. Operations depended on commercial terms and locked down data centers. When the storm arrived, the only step needed was to flip the invisible switch, embedded by design deep in the architecture. With one coordinated move, the battlefield went dark. This is more than a cautionary tale. It is a mirror held up to each of us. How many of our institutions, companies, and daily lives run on platforms, clouds, and devices whose true power sits far beyond our reach? How much of our safety, productivity, and identity dangles by threads we cannot trace or control? Your security and autonomy, whether as a nation, a business leader, or an ordinary citizen, now hinge on who you allow behind your screen. The stakes are not abstract. Military planners, CEOs, public officials, and people everywhere are exposed. Sovereignty is not only lost with gunfire or bombs, it can vanish silently, buried in code you cannot read, hardware you cannot open, or contracts you cannot enforce if the world shifts beneath your feet. So what can be done? How can nations, organizations, and individuals reclaim digital sovereignty and defend themselves against the specter of an electronic storm? First, nations must invest in homegrown technology. This means developing indigenous chip manufacturing, open-source software, and secure communications protocols. Israel, for example, has built a robust cybersecurity sector, producing its own encryption tools and vetting every component used in critical systems. South Korea has mandated domestic alternatives for key parts of its telecom infrastructure, reducing reliance on foreign vendors. Second, supply chains must be scrutinized and diversified. Every component, from microchips to cables, must be traceable and tested for tampering. The United States Department of Defense now maintains strict controls over its hardware supply, using trusted foundries and auditing every shipment for integrity. The European Union has launched initiatives to reduce dependence on non-European technologies in its critical infrastructure. Third, transparency must become a standard. Governments and companies should demand access to source code, encryption algorithms, and hardware schematics. Open-source solutions, where anyone can inspect the code, offer greater security and trust. Estonia, after suffering a massive cyber attack in 2007, rebuilt its national systems on open standards, making its networks both more resilient and more transparent. Fourth, training and awareness must be prioritized. Human error remains the single largest vulnerability in any system. Regular cyber hygiene training, background checks for critical personnel, and strict access controls are essential. The case of the bribed data center officer in our scenario could have been prevented with better oversight and support for at-risk staff. Fifth, international cooperation is vital. Cyber threats know no borders. Nations must share intelligence, coordinate defenses, and establish norms for responsible behavior in cyberspace. The Budapest Convention on Cybercrime and NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence are examples of how collective security can be enhanced. Finally, resilience must be built into every layer of society. Backup systems, manual overrides, and analog fallbacks should exist for every critical function. Switzerland, famous for its civil defense preparations, maintains redundant communication systems that can function even if digital networks fail. Japan's disaster response protocols include paper maps, radio networks, and even messenger runners, proof that sometimes old-fashioned methods are the ultimate safeguard against high-tech threats. As we move forward, the challenge is not just technical, but cultural. We must cultivate a mindset that values independence, scrutiny, and adaptability. The story of the electronic storm is a warning, but it is also a call to action. We can choose to remain dependent and vulnerable, or we can build systems, technological, organizational, and personal, that are truly our own. Ask yourself, who holds the keys to your vital systems? Do you know the origins of your technology, the hands behind the code, the unseen gatekeepers? Are your defenses truly your own, or just rented, with strings attached that you do not see? History will not celebrate those with the flashiest gadgets. It will remember the side that grasped the real nature of digital trust and built resilience from the ground up. The lesson is stark. Technological power is real power, if, and only if, it is truly yours. As we continue our journey to explore how digital sovereignty can be reclaimed, on the battlefield, in boardrooms, and in our personal lives, consider this. What are you willing to risk, and what are you prepared to build, to ensure the switch remains in your hands? The invisible war has already begun. The outcome depends not on who has the most technology, but on who truly owns it. The future belongs to those who control the code, and through it, their own destiny.